know that Marshfield, with its narrow gas-lit main street, 725 yards long, must seem like a place to drive through as quickly as possible, particularly if there is a cold northeasterly wind. It looks as if it had grown up from the outcrop of stone on which it stands, and in fact it has done almost that, because underneath most of the houses are cellars from which the building stone was first quarried. Marshfield, strictly a town by virtue of a charter granted by Henry III, had been very much the same kind of place for a long time. In the present century the population has remained at a steady 1100 or so. The church tower and school, the congregational chapel, paddocks, farmyards with deep litter houses, pigsties and beehives, all tell of the industry and community life going on behind the facade of this long, straight street. I was brought up in London. In fact, until 9 years ago, I lived only 2 minutes' walk from Sloane Square. I loved being there, but now I have come to enjoy living here. But please notice the way I said that, because I found the first 4 years very hard. It is always at least a little colder here than it is in the valley. Sometimes I felt it just wasn't worth it. But now, well, I feel I belong. Here is another foreigner, talking about her early days in Marshfield. She is Eileen Davis, wife of our schoolmaster who came from Leeds.
The first thing that really struck me was the fact that nobody ever locked a door. We just went out, left everything as it was. The people in the village are very trusting, and if there is a stranger about, well, they all know and keep an eye on what's happening. They're very, very nice with regards to helping you. They're not always on your doorstep, prying into your private affairs, but if you're ever in trouble, they're there. I very readily remember when I went into the maternity home to have my baby boy, and my husband tells me that a lady and her 2 daughters just came to the front door and said, "Where are the cleaning things?" And that was that. When I came out, all the house was cleaned through for me, and not just clean but decorated with holly, and well, I just couldn't believe it. It was a lovely homecoming.
Like Eileen Davis, I have come to feel at home in Marshfield. Now even I can tell the time of day and almost the season of the year by what passes my door. At first light, the farmhand from Westland's farm will walk past in his heavy boots. Then the milk churns clatter, as milk is collected from Greenland's farm. The farm contractor who lives opposite may be up early to help with ploughing, spraying or haymaking. Lorries leave to fetch animal feeding stuffs and fertilizers from Avonmouth. Harry Knight's flocks of Hampshire Down sheep, with their attendant sheepdog on their way to new pasture, go past early to miss the fast traffic. The school buses leave just after 8, taking children to Kingswood Grammar School, Oldham Secondary Modern School and Rodway Technical School. The commuters leave next for Bath and Bristol and Chippenham to work in shops, factories and offices. Just before 9, the young children go down to Marshfield School. And then, apart from a little bustle at lunchtime perhaps, the village street goes back to being the A420. Marshfield is well supplied with shops. 5 grocers, 1 draper, 1 baker, 1 butcher, 2 newsagents, a post office. Mr. Chivers, the postman, is also the men's hairdresser. There are 3 garages. The 2 banks, each open on 1 day a week. Once there were 7 pubs, there are 4 now. Vets come from Chippenham and Bath, and an accountant and an optician call weekly. The village comes back to life when the children start coming out of school. And a village like Marshfield is a good place to be very young in. The children may gather primroses, wild lily of the valley, wild daffodils and watercress from the brook. They tell each other the story of the cavalier and his horse, who lie buried under the hazelnut hedge in Bull's Hills fields. He was fleeing from the Battle of Lansdowne. There is a mound, But what a pity it would be to dig it up and find he wasn't there, so no one bothers. The primary school in Marshfield was built 100 years ago, but the classrooms are light and airy and have modern desks, and they are kept warm by solid fuel stoves. Every year, young student teachers come to the village school, sometimes colonial students. I particularly remember Mr. Saladai, a Nigerian. He made a great impression on the children, and as most of the students do, he stayed in the schoolmaster's house. Eileen Davis tells us about him.
People in the village were so kind, and everywhere we went he was made most welcome. In fact, he said that his idea of the English way of life had changed completely with coming to Marshfield, and he'd always treasure what the Marshfield people had tried to show him of their way of life. And since he's been back in Nigeria, we've had Christmas cards and a wedding invitation, and he still corresponds with us.
A village like this doesn't exist on its own. The tradespeople deliver goods to all the surrounding farms and villages. I have never carried an overladen shopping basket since I came here. Bread is delivered on 5 days in the week, and such bread, often hot and fragrant from Arthur Hammond's oven. Fish comes twice each week, and the weekend joint is brought by Mrs. Ford, who helps her husband the butcher with deliveries and the bookkeeping, but not with the slaughtering. John Ford gave me his views on the meat-buying habits of countrywomen.
The main thing, I think, with the country people is that they like to come in and see chops cut off a loin, or a piece of sirloin cut off of a loin of beef, or anything like that. For instance, a couple of years ago, I had a refrigerated window put into my shop, and naturally I filled it up with little bits of sausages on trays, and they used to come in and still they'd have their meat cut off, the joints hung up. And I used to say to them, well, why won't you have these here? They used to say, well, we don't want those, they probably were left from yesterday. Do you remember the time about the oxtail? That'll tell you whether country folk are different to town folk or not.
Yes, well, you asked me what size I wanted. I didn't know. I waved my hands about, said, well, it's about as big as that. And you said, well, they're out in the field at the back. If you like to go out and have a look, you can pick the one you want.
Do you remember? You never had one after all.
You may think that countrywomen are very spoiled by service like this, but don't forget we have to organise our lives within the transport available. One may not always have the family car, and not many are yet two-car families. You can fly from London to New York in a few hours, but to get from one English village to another requires concentrated study of the most complicated bus timetables. Not so very long ago, though, transport from Marshfield was a good deal more primitive. Edgar Lewis, stonemason and bell-ringer, casts his mind back.
Well, of course, the transport in my young days was all horse transport, and not until 1921 did we see a bus in Marshfield. Before that date, we used to have a regular horse carriage from Marshfield to Bath on Wednesdays and Saturdays. This lady, known as Sally Fishlock, she used to drive this four-wheeled brake, or wagonette as it was called, to Bath with about 6 people, and they thought they had a beautiful outing when they went to Bath shopping, perhaps once a year. Then there was another party known as billets that used to go to Bristol once a week, and that was the type of transport that people had to move out of Marshfield up to the date 1921, when the buses started coming to Marshfield for the first time. I very well remember Mr. Ernest Britton. He said, what do you think? He said, there's a man gone out of his mind down at Bristol. He's sending a bus to Marshfield every day. If ever you heard anything so silly in all your life, they'll never last a month.
Like other country people, we at Marshfield are great ones for hiring a coach. sports clubs, women's institute, choir, bell ringers. We all do it. If the weather seems settled in the summer, it's wonderful to decide to have a trip to the sea, to Weston-super-Mare or Southsea or Weymouth. You're picked up from the door in the morning with all the buckets and spades and food that children require, straight down to the seafront, and brought back in the evening to your own front door. Older people always seem very young here. They keep on working and enjoying life. There is an over-70s fund run by Mrs. Hammond, but there was not enough support for an over-60s club. Some live in the 8 two-roomed almshouses built in 1612 by Elias Crisp as a thank offering for being spared in the plague. There are also 6 new bungalows of experimental design for old people. Marshfield has its Women's Institute, and when Institute members decide something needs doing, they get it done. For instance, the WI have sponsored ballroom dancing lessons, and boys and girls come from miles around on Saturday evenings. Well, there we are. Like all English country people, we have many kinds of interest in our village, and we know all that goes on. We gossip, but not unkindly. The newcomer is welcomed, and rather cannily perhaps, the native-born are very ready to let townspeople who retire to the country take on chores. As Joy Pierce told me,
we leave all the parochial work to the people who come into the village. I think true Marshfield people, they sit back in their chair and think, well, these people, they come into the village and they're having all the benefits that Marshfield people have worked for. Let them do something now.
Village life is changing, but not too dramatically, I hope. We watch the overbuilt towns creeping up towards us, but there is still a lot of life in these Cotswold hills, and I don't think many of us envy those who rush to catch the next tube train.